Welcome to Behind the Scenes in Israel. I'm Dan Diker, and these are conversations with Mayor of Efrat, Mayor Oded Revivi, about life in Israel, politics, diplomacy, law, day-to-day life you will not hear in the mainstream media. And now we're talking about a serious behind-the-scenes issue, a moment of truth for Israelis, Palestinians, the Middle East, and the West. We're talking about the U.S. plan for peace and the reigning confusion in the international community about what this plan offers and what this plan is not. So come and join us as we have an in-depth discussion with Mayor of Efrat, Oded Revivi. You've been on the front lines of this media and diplomacy discussion in Israel, and it has great implications for what the reigning confusion is outside of Israel. Mayor Oded Revivi, Mayor of Efrat, you've been leading an international campaign to clarify what the U.S. plan for peace is and what all this confusion around the world is about the U.S. plan for peace. Many people believe that it is a unilateral land grab, annexation of Palestinian land, and it's anything but annexation, isn't it?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation once again. It's always interesting and challenging to be hosted with you as an interviewer. You know, we're living through crazy times. We can't ignore the news that we're hearing from the United States, the riots in Los Angeles, in New York, people losing their businesses, closing down businesses, people being hurt. And it's heartbreaking, and you can understand when these are the headlines. And we haven't recovered from COVID-19, that such an issue, an important issue, that in normal days would have been the center of attention for all the international media coverage, is almost ignored, allows amateurs to play in the international field, not understanding the differences and implications of using different terminology, inaccurate facts, basing on that TV interviews, and then you get real fake news. And unfortunately, that fake news is often used by the people who don't want to see the actual process, the actual initiative going forward.
So let me go right to the heart of that issue.
But I haven't answered your question yet.
Right, exactly. I'm going to go. What does it mean when you say, I just wanted to break up so for our viewers, zoom right in to what you have been saying on Israeli television, and you have really taken really a front seat and have been front and center in the Israeli media discussion. You talk about, and the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has talked about the application of Israeli law to normalize life in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, for Jews and Arabs. In America, they talk about annexation. What does it mean? Let's clarify this issue. What is the application of Israeli law to normalize life for Jews and Arabs in the West Bank, which is actually what's happening on the ground?
So let me just sum up in 2 sentences what I wanted to conclude before, and I'll get to your point. Number one, as I'm not blaming anyone in the American audience or in the Israeli public getting confused, because the headlines in the paper are annexation, sovereignty. Hardly anyone uses the real term applying Israeli law. The other thing is that we are starting in a weak point, is that we have a situation where both leaders of both countries, the United States and Israel, are suffering from lack of acceptance by some of the public, and everything they say is taken with a pinch of salt. But if we look and the plan itself and examine what it actually says, it only uses the term applying Israeli law, which, by the way, is exactly the same legal term used in the legislation that the Israeli parliament has legislated when they wanted to apply it on the Golan Heights. When you look at the law that was passed by the Israeli parliament regarding the Golan Heights, it said applying Israeli law in the Golan Heights. Because it happened so many years ago, we know that since then there were between 4, if not 5 prime ministers who even negotiated peace on the territory of the Golan Heights. So I'm not saying that in order to weaken the peace initiative, but I am saying that just understand applying Israeli law doesn't mean annexation, and it doesn't even mean sovereignty. Unfortunately, for some of the people who I represent who want to see in it sovereignty and annexation, that's not what's on offer on the table at the moment. Why is it so important to understand what is on the table and to understand what it's meaning? Is because, number one, you understand that it doesn't shut down options for the future, whether I agree with them or don't agree with them, whether I think they'll happen or not, but that's not what's on the table at the moment. And number two, and that is the reason I think, or I know that I fell in love with this peace initiative, is that in the first time, it comes and looks at the reality that has been created on the ground. Instead of trying to go back to old maps, to old agreements that have been signed and failed, it says, let's look what has been the reality that's been created on the ground. Let's take that into normality. Let's transform that into normal life that people can actually build a better future, and that will be the foundations of the vision of the peace plan. It's interesting to see people are afraid of what will be in the final destination, at the final page of this peace plan. It hasn't been written yet. You know why? Because the only thing that has been written is the introduction, is the vision. We want to reach there, we don't know yet how. For that, they're opening a period of time for 4 years to actually negotiate how it will look.
So, Mayor Revivi, you've talked several times in your answer, detailed answer, about a peace plan. Israel's applying Israeli civilian law in the context of a peace plan. Many people are confused and they don't see the Israeli moves as part of the peace plan. But in fact, this plan, and we've talked about this before in other discussion fora, is in a way conceptually a replication of what every Labor Prime Minister has advocated since 1967. Levi Eshkol, Golda Meir, Yitzhak Rabin, and even Ehud Barak before he became Prime Minister. It was called defensible borders in the Jordan Valley, because we're talking about the application of Israeli law first and foremost in the Jordan Valley. The vast majority of Israelis, left center, center and center right, and to the right of that, agree that Israel will always have to control or apply Israeli civilian law to the Jordan Valley. Many people in America don't understand the consensus security agreement over the Jordan Valley.
So 2 points. Number one, you're absolutely right. This has been the traditional approach throughout the years of all the Israeli governments. We've seen that after 3 rounds of elections in the last year, we have the 2 major parties, blue and white, and Likud, agreeing on this point. It is one of the only detailed sections in the coalition agreement that has been signed by Netanyahu and by Benny Gantz. So you're right in saying that there is a consensus. But I think what you're missing in your question, if I may correct your question, is that the problem when you say that this is a peace plan, people ask you, where is the other side? The fact that you have managed to unite your camp to a consensus agreement on this issue, and we know that there's no 100% consensus, there are people who are against it, both on the right and both on the left, but the vast majority of the people in Israel see it as a step moving forward. We're missing the other side. And I think that has been the challenge of all the peace initiatives throughout the generations. Because even when we brought the other side to actually sit around the table, sometimes when it got to the signing time, we saw how President Mubarak was literally pushing Yasser Arafat, holding his hand whilst he was signing, that everybody understood that he wasn't signing out of his own will. We saw how...
By the way, what did Mubarak call in Arabic? What did he call Arafat?
I don't remember.
He called him the word kalb, which means he said, you dog. And that shows, we'll get into that in a moment, the lack of trustworthiness from the Arab world towards the Palestinian leadership, and it's gotten worse today. But we'll talk about that in a minute.
But basically, even when we saw the Palestinians actually coming to the table, actually reaching the official ceremony of signing, there wasn't really attendance there. Somebody else needed to hold his hand to actually do the signature. We remember Prime Minister Rabin saying, you have to negotiate peace or carry on with the peace agreement as if there are no terror attacks, and you need to battle the terror attacks as if there's no peace negotiation. That's not what we are striving for when we say we want a peace plan. And again, why did I fall in love with this peace plan? Because it's an indication to the Palestinians. We know that you haven't been coming up to meetings with our representatives of the American administration. We know you weren't willing to negotiate with them. We know that you weren't taking part in the foreplay. But if you carry on saying no, just like you've said all over the time, you're going to lose something very important. You're going to lose the veto power of saying no, which that is what has happened throughout the generations. And the Americans are saying, if you don't wake up, and it's a message to both people, to the administration of the Palestinian people, but also to the general public, if you don't start engaging and understanding that a reality has been created on the ground, the train might leave the station into a destination that you're not part of.
Even more, let me just add one point to your very important analysis here. The Palestinian Authority, beginning with its former leader Yasser Arafat, continuing with his deputy and loyalist Mahmoud Abbas, who is the aging and elderly chairman of the Palestinian Authority, they have said no 9 times in a row to offers of independence and sovereignty since 1936. They have said no to Israel's most left-leaning progressive prime ministers who offered them nearly 100% of everything they asked for, and they still said no. What you're telling us, I believe, is a shift from what we knew as concession-based diplomacy, meaning Israel was expected to concede all kinds of benefits to the Palestinian Authority, and that would bring them to the table to say yes, and they actually said the opposite. And here, I think what you're saying, Mayor Revivi, is that we've moved into a new concept called security-based diplomacy, that you have to begin with what Israel's vital security requirements are, and that can secure a real peace with an independent Palestinian sovereign entity next to you that won't threaten you strategically or existentially. That's what I'm understanding that you're saying the shift is today, and saying to the Palestinian Authority, if you think for the 10th time in a row, since 1936, you can wait, get all the concessions from Israel, and then say no again, the U.S. administration is saying, no, that game is no longer happening. If you continue to say no, you may get less and less, but still something viable. They're still talking about 70% of the territory in the heart of the Jewish historical heartland, a very painful concession, but a viable Palestinian state not threatening Israel if they say yes this time.
I think you're accurate in saying that there is a shift here. There's a different perspective. When I met Jason Greenblatt the first time that he came as the representative of the president, as an envoy to start moving this plan, he definitely expressed an interest in not repeating the mistakes that were done in the past and coming with something which is new and refreshing. I don't want to undermine and say that the previous peace agreements ignored Israeli security guidelines and Israeli security needs. But the shift is that now we're saying these are the things that we must have, and now let's ignore the past. We know that in the past you didn't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Let's see how we can move forward and make something better. And that is the shift in this peace plan that takes a different approach. Unfortunately, it's not being discussed enough, it's not being explained enough, people don't understand it. It's not a unilateral move that's being done by Israel, it is an indication of a vision as to where we want to go to.
You know, as I want to continue along this line of the reaffirmation by this U.S. administration of Israel's historical and legal rights in negotiations. You know, as every Israeli government since 1948 has based its policy actions in terms of territory on a 1948 law that affirms the 1920 international community decision based on the League of Nations that came from the San Remo Conference, and then the principal powers of the League of Nations in 1922 affirmed the right of the Jewish people to reconstitute their national homeland in British Mandate Palestine. That legal decision that was legally binding in the beginning of last century was carried forward by the United Nations Charter itself, Article 80, which many people in the international community forget, but it is the basis on which every Israeli administration since 1948 has based its understanding, its self-understanding of Israel's rights. And here the U.S. administration, under President Trump and his very able senior aides, Mr. Attorney Greenblatt and Ambassador Friedman, and of course Jared Kushner, senior advisor, have recognized that the United States must recognize what was recognized 100 years ago in order to create an equality diplomatically in terms of rights, legal rights between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors. That had not been the case in the 4 peace processes since 2000.
I would add even more to that. I know that this current administration receives a lot of criticism for a lot of things, and I'm not going to take part in that discussion in the United States policy. But regarding the approach towards the state of Israel, or regarding the approach towards bringing a peace plan to this region, they understood that they need to try and see how they can tempt both parties to actually engage in this peace plan. And Israel definitely gained a lot of things. Israel gained recognition of a lot of things that we were striving through and hoped for in the past. Applying Israeli law to 30% of Judea and Samaria has been a long time dream for over 52 years since we rebuilt the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. But they also came to the Palestinians with offers. They also came to the Palestinians with suggestions of things that they can gain out. And I think that is the balance that they're looking in creating. It's interesting because with Israel, they are looking on historical events, but very quickly implementing to temptations or to gains which are immediate. With the Palestinians, it's gains which will come in the future because there isn't so much to show of historical things that we can back up, because as you said, they never really accepted any of the offers that were on the table.
They haven't accepted the offers that were on the table. In the past, Mayor Revivi, they had the public and even the private support of the Arab League. Today, there's been a revolution and a complete shift of fortunes in the Arab regional context. And many of our viewers may be unaware that, that the Saudis, the Gulf states, especially the Emirates, as well as Jordan and Egypt, have quietly sent messages to Israel that said, in so many words, go ahead with your plan. It is not worth our national interest, which today means defeating the Islamic Republic of Iran and the threats that Iran creates for every single one of those Arab countries that I just mentioned. It's not worth sacrificing our relationship with the United States in order to come out and make create a lot of regional instability vis-a-vis Israel over this plan. There is a lot of frustration in my authoritative understanding of people I've spoken with in the region towards the Palestinian from the Arab states, because they have said no every time, and today they have a $50 billion Hong Kong potential project to turn their their state into the Hong Kong in the Middle East, and they have BDS, the Arab world's attempt to invite them to Bahrain, which they did some months ago. So I think there's a context here that many people in the West may be missing.
You're absolutely right, but I don't think the West is really missing it, and I'll tell you why. Because we know for a fact that in 2017, foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority has dropped by 70%. The majority of the foreign aid didn't come from Arab countries, but came from countries like Europe. And when you go and examine why did foreign aid drop to the Palestinian Authority, it dropped for 2 major reasons. Number one, because those countries are suffering hardship. They've got internal problems that they don't have the funds available like they had in the past. The European community is not as strong financially as it was when there was the Oslo Accord. And number two, which I think is way more significant, we know how Arabs govern themselves. It's not the same type of governing system that the Americans have and the Israelis have. We wouldn't have liked to live under such governing system. But the common denominator of all those leaders that you mentioned, of all those countries, is that they say, listen, we are responsible for what happens in our country. We are taking care in whatever way we think we need to take care. We govern in whatever method we think we need to govern, but our administration is secure. The Palestinian Authority is not really managing to govern. They have become corrupt, they have become weak. Foreign aid has dropped also because of the corruption. The corruption meaning that the private individuals don't get the necessities that they need, that they want. If we go back to the Oslo Accord, one of its initiatives, which is a Western initiative, go and have open elections. We want you to run yourself in a democracy mannerism. That might be foreign to them. They might not want to do it. For a fact, they haven't had elections for over 14 years, where you see at the end of the day that the private individual that I meet in the street, my neighbors across the vineyard, they say to me, Oded, we see how your gardens are flourishing, we see how ours are crumbling, we want to have the same future as yours. And that's why this peace plan is a shift, because it's telling those private individuals, look, it can be different, but you need to take a stand. And as long as your administration is not providing for you what you need, you don't have working places, poverty is going down and down. We're withdrawn from Gaza. Why? Because of international pressure. Whilst we were in Gaza, there was running water, there was electricity, there were working places, people worked in Tel Aviv. International pressure, disengage, occupy territories, withdraw. We withdraw, never mind what were the reasons. Today there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Nobody wants to take responsibility. Israel is criticized for not looking after Gaza. You can't hold the rope on both hands and say, look after them, don't be there. That's what we are.
This is a very important point. The international community, in short, is holding Israel responsible as being an occupier of Gaza, when those same international community activists and governments and diplomats and media were calling for Israel to pull out lock, stock, and barrel, which Israel did in 2005, yet the Palestinian Authority, in fact, begged Israel to keep supplying electricity, begged Israel to keep supplying water, and begged Israel actually to also to protect the area from ISIS and from Al Qaeda and from other extremist elements. Now, what has happened from an Israeli point of view? This is something we did mention earlier in our discussion. Is that Israel undertook two very risky, dangerous experiments. As you mentioned, we pulled out of Gaza in 2005 in a land for peace formula. And we received rockets, missiles, terror tunnels, and what they call these burning kite flags that burn thousands of acres of Israeli.
To the undisputed territories, let's just add.
In undisputed territories, right. That was the experiment number two. Experiment number one took place in 2000, when Israel unilaterally withdrew from the security zone in Lebanon due to, as you put it very well, international pressure. What happened? Did we get land for peace? No, we got Iran regime by the thousands sitting in southern Lebanon and southern and central Syria, and in central Lebanon as well. So we've had 2 out of 2 experiences that some people call high risk, extremely dangerous, and if we were to do it for the third time, which the Israeli body politic and the government and our security echelons have said would be suicide, to bring Gaza, Hamas, Iran into areas right over Ben Gurion Airport. That is a security context for this peace plan, because it's a peace and security plan. It's a peace plan that can happen, that, as you say, and I like it very much too, because it's a peace that can be and must be secured from the get-go, and the context of which these 2 examples, high-risk examples, where we got terror instead of peace for land.
I would just add on that the risk hasn't been put away yet, because we know that we have over 130,000 missiles and rockets in southern Lebanon, which if in the past Kiryat Shmona was in the fire zone, Haifa was in the fire zone, today those missiles can hit any place in Israel, and it's only a matter of one crazy guy pushing the button and the whole of Israel will be bombed. Israel has a problem defending itself, because a lot of these missiles and rockets have been put underneath hospitals, schools, kindergartens that Israel won't be able to have a pre-attack on them in order to eliminate those missiles being shot to Israel. And you're absolutely right. Now we're talking about way closer distances, a much higher security risk. And again, that's why I think those issues were thought about and dealt with in this peace initiative.
Let's go and share another aspect of the Arab world and the Palestinian relationship. Probably our greatest Arab affairs reporter and analyst, Jackie Hugi, who should be heard in international circles because his relationships with the Arab world, even with Islamic with groups, are extraordinary. He reported the other day on main Israeli news channel that many Palestinians in the West Bank, in this area, Area C, people that you have not only spoken peace with, but you've helped with infrastructure and medicine and education and job opportunities, they want to have Israeli citizenship or residency or some kind of what they call permissions to work and to be involved with Israel. And many of them, he reported, said they are quietly in favor of this plan for Israel to apply Israeli law because they want to be part of the Israeli reality, not the Palestinian reality, as we know what happens when the PA, which is a non-democracy, rules. Question is this: should the government of Israel when they apply Israeli law, should that include the 20 to 25,000 Palestinian residents of the areas outside of Jericho? Because Jericho is a Palestinian Authority enclave. It's no longer part of the Israeli territorial reality. Do you think that this plan will, as you say, it's still in process, will include rights of some sort, democratic rights, could be residency rights, like East Jerusalem, the Arabs in East Jerusalem, should have, together with their Israeli neighbors, Jewish neighbors, in those areas of the Jordan Valley where Israel applies civilian law?
So I think the most tempting, attractive answer that you would like me to say is yes, okay? Because that will be an indication that we are for equal rights and we want to give them equal rights and we're not an apartheid state. But there is a danger in that, and we are aware of that danger. And I think that's what the Oslo Accord tried to prevent. Because you brought the example of East Jerusalem. After the residents of East Jerusalem were given rights to vote within Israeli municipality elections, and they were given a special citizenship status, we saw an increase of hundreds of percent of people moving into that region.
From the West Bank, you mean?
Yes. Why? Because they understood where the butter is spread. They understood that their day-to-day life is better on this side of the line rather than this side of the land, and anybody who got an opportunity just used it. And then we had stories of uniting families, and some of these uniting families were a complete fixture because there were people who, purely for financial reasons, wanted to be where the butter is spread.
You're saying it was a fiction?
It was a fiction. Now, there was a suggestion of Naftali Bennett to annex the whole of Area C. And he said, and we will give citizenship to the 60,000 Arabs that live there. Those who criticized his suggestion said, you're not talking about 60,000 because in no time you will have 600,000 there because people understand what's the potential of being there. The Oslo Accord tried to prevent it and basically established a Palestinian parliament that the Palestinian people will be able to vote for their leadership. And that's how you got equal rights, each one voting for their own House of Representatives. And then there's no discrimination. And then there's no apartheid state. About very small numbers, about very specific areas that we will have to see how these 4 years of negotiation end up. There was half a spin put in the first publication of the peace plan that part of the Arab villages, which are today Israeli citizenship, will be allowed to go and become part of the Palestinian state. There was a big uproar. How dare you shift them from Israel to Palestine? Now Palestine hasn't been set up yet, but I thought it was a great trick that was put in the plan just to show how sometimes the call for self-determination of the Palestinians is not a real genuine call, because here you have Palestinians who the day before 1948 weren't part of Israel, the day before 1967 they were part of Israel, now become part of your state, what you're claiming for. Your members of Knesset, the Arab members of Knesset, want a Palestinian state. No, we want to be members of Knesset of Israel, but we also want to have a Palestinian state. And that's again holding the rope on both its ends. And we will have to see exactly how that issue is being determined, but it's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed.
I want to just clarify, having worked on this apartheid issue, Israel, and having been in apartheid South Africa myself and witnessed the horrors of apartheid, and Israel is not in any way anything close to what the BDS movement has accused of being an apartheid state. This is a free country. This is a country that guarantees by law the equal rights of all of its citizens. We have discrimination, as every democratic country unfortunately has, but we have self-correcting mechanisms, like we have NGOs, and we have a vibrant, sometimes suicidal press from a democratic point of view, but hypercritical. And even in the issue of the West Bank and Gaza, let's be very clear, especially for our viewers. Beginning with peace processes in 1993, the Oslo peace process that began with the exchange of letters, Israel returned 88% since 1967 of all lands it was forced to take in a defensive war in 1967. That includes all of Sinai, that includes all of Gaza, that includes a part of Samaria, and that constitutes 88% of all lands that Israel was forced to take in 1967. So I think we should put this all in perspective. We are talking today about splitting what is remaining in Israel's hands in the West Bank in half. So while the Palestinians were to be promised what Yitzhak Rabin talked about, of blessed memory, 70% of the West Bank for a viable, contiguous Palestinian state by roads and tunnels, we're talking really about 50% of Area C to them and 50% to Israel. And one last point here, you've mentioned in the context of the 4-year waiting period, Israel's rights, perhaps in concert with the American administration, because Israel would only be able to apply Israeli law in concert with the current American administration, is in the context of a 4-year plan where Israel would give up its rights in those 4 years to build additional communities until our Palestinian neighbors make a decision whether they want to play in this game called peace or they don't want to play. So it is a moment of truth for the Palestinian leadership. This American administration understands it, the Israeli public understands it, the Arab world understands it. The question is, why is it that our European friends in Western Europe, because the Eastern Europeans get it more than the Western Europeans, why so much continued condemnation by the Western Europeans when it's so clear to the Arab world behind the scenes what's going on?
I think the challenge again, and I think we started off with it, is the lack of trust of some people in the leaders at the moment. Even within the American political system, you see the former ambassador Dan Shapiro saying that you shouldn't carry on now with the peace plan, you need to wait until after the elections. And then what will happen? Let's go back to the suggestions that have failed already in the past.
Yeah.
There is here a plan on the table which learned from the mistakes that were done in the past, and let's give it a chance. When I was in DC and I asked the American administration officials that I was meeting, who is the salesperson that needs to market it? Who is going to explain it to the public? You've explained it to me. I'm convinced. It makes sense. I fell in love. Who is going now to sell it to the public?
The American public, you mean?
I asked the Americans, I was asking regarding the Israelis, but I think your question clarifies it even better, okay? I said, who is going to be the salesperson? Who is going to explain it?
You mean the international salesperson?
I just asked who was being I understand your question,
Right.
and I'll answer it in a minute, but
Okay.
I asked who is going to be the one who is presenting it. And the answer I got was, we're relying on the number one salesperson that you have. I said, our Prime Minister. They said, right, of course. Now, our Prime Minister, in the last year, has been extremely busy with 3 rounds of elections, with a lawsuit that he needs to handle, with an attempt to form a coalition. His plate is full. I met him, not yesterday, the day before, okay? His plate is full. And I said to him, somebody needs to do marketing. So he agreed with me. But the issue is that if you don't have a selling campaign, if you don't have an advertising campaign, who is going to sell it? You allow all the negative powers to dig into it. Now, I'm part of the Yesha Council, and within the Yesha Council, which is the umbrella organization of all the Jewish towns and cities in Judea and Samaria, there's a dispute. Those who are for and those who are against. I sat with the people who are against. Prime Minister Netanyahu sat with the people who are against. It's obvious that they're against because they don't understand all the little details of the plan. So when you ask me about the international community, about Democrats, about the Europeans, some of them don't want to listen, because just bearing the notion that it is a peace plan that was initiated by a president that they don't necessarily like, they're shutting down, they're not even willing to hear what's underneath the title. So just like that in the part of the American political system, part in the European communities, and part in Israel, don't want to listen. And when you don't want to listen, you start imagining all sorts of things which don't really appear in the deal. And that is the tragedy. And that's why I'm willing to spend the time with you, because I understand that there is a need to go out and speak and say what this plan really promises, what it can bring that wasn't here before, and how it can really change or benefit the future.
One of the very unusual aspects of this plan is really the reason that we're sitting here this morning. You're the mayor of Efrat, now almost 13 years. You were the foreign envoy for the Yesha Settler Council for some time before retiring that position to someone else. And yet, this plan managed to embrace you as someone who is positioned to the right of center in the settler community, and yet the Israeli national consensus is in this discussion this morning. This is what's very interesting here. This is the first peace plan that, because it approaches Jewish-Israeli rights in negotiations with the possibility of applying Israeli law on the one hand, securing Israeli rights and Israeli security, and at the same time allowing for the emergence under certain conditions of a non-militarized, Western-style, peaceful Palestinian sovereign entity, it actually can embrace the vast majority of the Israeli body politic. That is a major shift from past plans that I believe, as an analyst of this region, many international diplomats don't understand the broad appeal of this plan to the Israeli body politic.
You might be right. There might be a lack of willingness to understand. We have to understand that the international community found it difficult understanding the Israeli political system, why we had to go 3 times for elections in just 1 year until a government was actually formed. And the government that was formed, that's not a decisive vote. That is a united government, both of blue and white and Likud, who are running one against the other in order to determine who is going to be the next prime minister. And we have within the agreement a period that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be a prime minister, and after a year and a half he's going to give it to the person who was running against him. That's crazy for any democratic society to actually understand. How could that be the end game of the elections? And part of the lack of understanding, and part of the reason that there wasn't a decisive vote, is because the voters found it very difficult to try and understand what are the differences in policy between the two parties. I'm not talking about personality. It turned into a vote over personality and not over policy. But if you understand that there is a unity over policy, if you understand that the coalition agreement between Likud and Blue and White explicitly says the date of the 1st of July to start implementing this peace plan, you understand that something in the Israeli public has changed. And that is why I also invest quite a lot of time with the diplomats who are sent over here, because they need to understand. They need to hear the voices from the society and not just stay in their luxurious villas or offices wherever they are located, saying, yes, we're representing our country in Israel, and not even hearing what the reality is. I'll just conclude on that matter that for quite a few years I used to invite usually European diplomats. And I said to them, come and tour Judea and Samaria with me. I want to show you the reality the way I see it. And they always used to say to me, Oded, that it's a trap. You know, you're pulling us into a trap. And I said, why? Well, you know, our official standing against Judea and Samaria, it's occupied territories. We can't cross the green line. We can't go. We can't see. We can't engage with you. And I said to them, you are doing misjustice to your sending countries, because you are crossing the green line. You go and visit Jericho and Bethlehem and Ramallah. You send a report to your sending countries. I've toured the West Bank and I've seen. You haven't toured the West Bank. You haven't seen. You've seen one side. If you don't see both sides, the report that you are sending is biased. They stopped for a second, they thought, and they said, you know what? You have a point. We'll come on Sunday with a rented car, unofficial clothing, completely off protocol. We trust you. The first one did an experiment. He saw I didn't run to the media, I didn't prepare any paparazzi photographers to take photos of him crossing the green line. God forbid he'll be sent back to his country. And then they started coming one after the other, because they understood that they're lacking understanding of what's happening on the ground. So it's still not common practice. I still can't take them on an official tour, but you understand that they're lacking understanding of what's happening.
You know, as we wind down in our discussion, one of the main points in the vision for peace of the U.S. administration is that it really does demand from the Palestinian side what every peace-loving Jewish person in the diaspora has asked of both sides, which is to refrain from incitement to violence. The plan calls on the Palestinians to refrain from all terror, to disarm the Hamas, to disarm the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, to return the administration of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. But it also calls on the Palestinian Authority to demilitarize, to stop the incitement, to stop paying terrorists, to incentivize a whole generation of young people with $350 million in 2019 out of the official PA budget that's now gone into the PLO budget as a type of camouflage. It makes demands on the Palestinian side that any freedom-loving, democracy-loving Western country would demand of itself. And this is something that Chairman Abbas does not like, and it's something that this is one of the reasons that he's trying to convince his European partners and allies to come out against the plan. And I think this is why this puts the Palestinian leadership in the hot seat, because they want the international community to resolve this conflict, and Israel wants a democratic, peaceful, demilitarized neighbor that wants to work with Israel and have economic alliances with Israel and not to threaten Israel. This is a major point that international supporters, friends, and others have to bear in mind.
I would just make, I think, one small correction. I don't think that the plan actually asked the Palestinian people to have a democratic governing system, and correct me if I'm wrong, because we understood, and I think the American administration understood, we can't decide for other people how to govern themselves. All the other items on the list are definitely on there, and are definitely items which any peace lover, any democratic person would want to see in a relationship between two human beings, between neighbors, and between different nations. You've mentioned the things that the Palestinians need to give up. We know that within the Israeli society, within the right wing, there are people who are upset about the things that Israel has to give up. And some of them are extremely painful, and it's important to mention them as well. And it's putting on hold some of the dreams of people that believe that this is the land of our fathers, and every step here was promised to us by the Bible, and we can't give it up. And this is a price that some people have to understand that we're giving up in order to receive offers of peace, that if they really come to fruition, it will change the reality into a reality that Ambassador Friedman called it, that it will be two countries like the United States and Canada, basically referring that the Palestinians will be like Canadians. I say we're taking the Palestinians and turning them from wolves into sheep. That is the peace that we're reading about in the Bible. That's why I, as a religious Jew, pray for every day for peace. That's how I want to see the reality. And I think this peace plan has the foundations of setting such a milestone. Whether we'll be able to reach the final destination of that path, we'll have to wait and see.
You know, thank you very much, Mayor Oded Revivi, for your remarks. I've said to you in the past that your position on this peace plan is reminiscent of the positions and the ideas of David Ben-Gurion and Benjamin Netanyahu, and you giggled as you do now, but let's remember that in 1947, when David Ben-Gurion became the first prime minister, it was without Israel's capital, Jerusalem, and he took the offer of the UN Special Committee on Palestine. He took a very bad offer, which was almost indefensible, but from there, as we know in Jewish tradition, redemption comes, in stages and in pieces. And that is what Ben-Gurion did. He accepted the international offer and built Israel from there. This is where, what I believe, and I think this is what you've been telling us, is the opportunity in this particular plan to apply Israeli law, to secure the peace and possibly have a diplomatic resolution with our Palestinian neighbors. Thank you ever so much.
Let me just conclude. You know, Oded in the Bible was a prophet, and I don't think I'm a prophet, because we know, according to the Jewish books, that prophecy after the destruction of the Third Temple was given to three types of people that I don't want to be part of what they are. Basically, stupid people, unintelligent people, but leadership calls for taking decisions. Ben-Gurion was a leader and he took decisions. Netanyahu is taking decisions. He's taking hard decisions. He's getting criticism from both camps, but he sees as a leader where it's his responsibility to go and take the people. And I, as the mayor of a city, a leader of a city, I'm taking decisions, I'm taking sides. Not always popular, but I think that's the reason that you choose to sit on the chair, in order to try and bring to a better future, and we all need to help to achieve that. So thank you very much.
God willing. Thank you. This has been Behind the Scenes of the U.S. Vision and Plan for Peace with Mayor of Efrat, Mayor Oded Revivi. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dan Diker in conversation with Mayor of Efrat, Oded Revivi. Behind the Scenes in Israel, the moment of truth, the U.S. Plan for Peace, obstacles and opportunities for Israelis, Palestinians, the Middle East, and the West. Please join us again soon when we have another dramatic episode of Behind the Scenes in Israel.